Smugglers, monks and kings have sailed the waters of Poole Harbour since Saxon and Roman times. It's one of the largest and most ancient natural harbours in the world, encircling 100 miles of shimmering waters, lapping along gleaming mudflats, forgotten beaches and busy quays. Queen Elizabeth I once designated Poole Harbour as a county in its own right, so vital was it to England's prosperity. While the smugglers found its maze of narrow waterways and the quiet hills around Corfe Castle ideal for concealing their contraband, African ivory, Brazilian parrots, Barbary gold and Cretan wine. Thomas Hardy was fascinated by the harbour's varied scenery and changing light. Describing the view from Nine Barrow Down, he wrote, "Silver sunbeams lighted up a many-armed inland sea, which stretched round an island of fir trees and gorse amid crimson heaths, wherein white paths occasionally met the eye." Outside, where the broad channel appeared, a berry line and opalized variegation of ripples, currents, deeps and shallows lay as fair under the sun as a New Jerusalem, the shores being of gleaming sand. One of the harbour's more remote and beautiful islands, aptly named Green Island, is uninhabited except for one couple, Guy and Joan Sydenham. Guy is a gifted potter who started his training when he was 15 years old as an apprentice thrower at Poole Pottery. Now, with red squirrels and birds for company, he uses only the abundance of natural clay and saltwater glazes to create his own distinctively original pots.
You see that seam goes right through there, look. It's
one, lovely, isn't it?
2, 3 seams of clay running through there in between the sandstone.
Quite a lot. We're lucky, aren't we?
Yeah. Here we're living on one of the famous beds of bog clay which supplies most of the trade. It's exported as well. People use it for paper making, cosmetics. It's like very valuable product, clay, humble as it is. And we're just lucky to be sitting on, hundreds of feet of this lovely plastic bog clay, which is the basis of most of our pottery.
Okay.
Yes, that's a lovely colourful seam up there. Look at that orangey bit. We live with the environment, part of it, if you like. We've got plenty of firewood here, clay to hand, and the sea. So when I make my pottery, I just go along and pick up some clay, and I've got my own equipment, which I made from scrap, bicycles and things like that. I feel that with mermaids, you've got a lot of latitude to use imagination and texture and colour. And so I throw the basic shapes on the wheel to start with. Being a potter, it's easier to throw up a hollow form on the wheel and then manipulate it partly while it's still soft and wet and slippery. And then you get a tactile feel for the form. It's like pulling a handle. It gives you a sort of sensual feel of form without having to model in hard clay. It's an easier method of doing it. You can't sit down at a drawing board and design a mermaid. It has to come from the materials and from your skills and from the feeling, first of all on the wheel while it's revolving and forming up in a nice tight shape, and then the manipulating. It all comes from the way you do it. Like a violinist, he doesn't sit down and design something to play. He uses a violin with his soul almost. And the resonance comes from the musical instrument he's using. And it's a similar kind of effect. mermaids, of course, are very mythical figures, aren't they? I mean, they were reported to be half sea creature and half human, and they call to the sailors in the Aegean and lure them onto the rocks, and I don't know how they died. It was a mystery, really. Could have been a good way to go.
Oh, look at that one, Guy. Look. Oh, it's really super, Guy, isn't it?
Gosh, it's marvellous flying this time. When they break open this kiln, which has been sealed with clay, and then lift the first bat off the top. And it's a wonderful excitement to open the kiln and take out each piece and reason why it's successful or otherwise, because a lot of it can go wrong. You know, you can get cracked pieces or pieces which have been too near the flame and have been completely spoiled by overfiring and overglazing. We came here 14 years ago, and we lived on an old MTB which I had then until we got the house built. And we've got a little wooden bungalow and a wood stove, which is quite snug, even in the freezing weather we just had. It's the natural environment I appreciate. We're away from influences of so-called civilization and commercialization. We're living with nature, and the wildlife becomes so friendly it's ridiculous. You know, they'll come right up to you and bring their families up to be fed. We like to feel that we're part of nature. And most people, of course, will probably call us cranks. But this is what we like, and we enjoy this way of life.
Shipbuilding in Poole goes back to Saxon times, and today Ken Latham, boat builder and marine engineer, still combines the old traditional methods of building in wood with the latest in modern techniques. He can turn a tree trunk into a unique £300,000 yacht, which is a work of craftsmanship that will last for generations to come.
We take various logs of timber such as teak, oak and iroko, cut them on the bandsaw to this fashion shape, kiln them out to the moisture content required, and then build the boats that you see in here or this one. And then when we're finished, they're fitted out completely, rigged, launched, and then we run the trials out in the harbour here and out in the bay as well. My father had a marine engineering business before me, and I started this boat building business, which has been going for the last 35 years. And we're just really building up using modern techniques of gluing and laminating into the old-fashioned type boats, which seems to be reasonably successful at the moment. So there's got to be clearance on that plane behind. We're training young people because it's the only way to get the skills nowadays. There are some skilled men about, but seems to be a gap growing, and the youngsters we've got to train to keep the skills going. Well, I've lived here all my life, and it's just part of me, really. The pool and the harbour and sailing is just part of life. It's a very pleasant way of living, I suppose.
seafaring skills of the men of Poole were legendary, but it was the land-loving merchants who prospered, while the men who sailed the ships suffered miserable hardships for a pittance. Bonnie Sartin is a Dorset songwriter with strong feelings about the injustice suffered by some of his ancestors.
I am an old merchant from the old port of Poole, and let me tell you, I'm nobody's fool. I gambled me money in the Newfoundland trade, 'cause that's where the biggest profits are made. Derry down, 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 Derry down. I am a poor sailor from the old port of Poole. Me life it is hard, me life it is cruel. I gamble me life in the Newfoundland trade, and a few measly pennies is all that I'm paid. Derry down, 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 Derry down.
We wrote it actually a few years ago, and we were asked to do a concert in the theatre here in Poole about the Poole Newfoundland trade. And so we wrote that, comparing the life of the poor old sailor who staggered across the Atlantic with the chap with loads of money who sat here in his mansion twiddling his thumbs all summer waiting for his ships to come back.
I am a Poole sailor on the old.
They had a rough time, those that went across there. Some of the ships were only 50 feet long, you know, and when they got back here, they would have to face the press gangs who were waiting for them, because obviously if you got there and you got back again, you know, alive, you were a good sailor.
Derry down, 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 Derry down. I am a poor sailor off the Newfoundland shore, of eggs by the dozen and cuts by the score. The summer out here is a long wintry flood. The cry of the gulls, the stink of cod. Derry down, 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 Derry down. I'm a happy Poole merchant.
Well, Poole itself, the harbour, is very prosperous, I feel, yes.
My investment was found.
It was a very rich little town, and a lot of fortunes were made with people fishing cod off the Newfoundland banks. They used to pull the people out of the workhouses, sometimes very young lads, and ship them off as apprentices to Newfoundland. Sometimes they'd be only 9 years old. And there's an instance of a chap called Ash who was sent across there as an apprentice. He went for 3 seasons, that's 3 summers and 2 winters, and came home with £10 in his pocket.
Back next year, Derry down, 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 Derry down, 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 Derry down.
Brian Mullins goes to sea in all weathers, though there's little reward for a lobster fisherman in the cold mist of a January day. Brian is the chairman of the Poole Harbour and District Fisheries Association and has fished from his traditional Poole yawl for more years than he cares to remember.
I've been born and bred here and never fished anywhere else other than Poole. I left school and went to work in a local boatyard, apprentice ship's joiner, and used to go out with the local men, and then from then on I worked with a man after that, fishing for 4.5 years, and been fishing on my own ever since. Looks easy in the summer, but it's more difficult this time of the year. This cold spell, the water temperature has dropped down, and lobsters and crabs in shallow water, you know, lay quiet and they won't feed. Well, it's a typical January morning, a little bit of easterly wind, and didn't catch a lot. I think we were lucky to catch 1 lobster. It's very difficult in shallow water this time of the year, mainly for crabs, but we were lucky this morning to have a lobster. always been taught to try and respect the sea. It's the way that, you know, you were brought up to, and I think if you try and do that all the time, it's the best way.
In 1854, an article in the London Illustrated News described Brownsea Island at the entrance to the harbour as a sequestered spot with its castle and church nestling among the hills and the trees, being visible to vessels passing up the harbour, and by its picturesqueness never failing to attract the tourist's imagination. Henry VIII built the original castle, and since that time, wealthy eccentrics, sea brigands, and members of almost every royal house in Europe have sought it out. Indeed, as the Prince Regent first landed on the quayside in 1818, he was heard to exclaim, "I had no idea there had been such a delightful spot in the kingdom." Kevin Cook is the chief warden on the island for the Dorset Trust for Nature Conservation.
Brownsea is unique. It's a fairly small island. It's very close to a very large town, and yet within its 500 or so acres you've got marshlands, you've got woodlands, heathlands, grassland. It's a fantastic place at every time of the year. There's wonderful atmosphere. On a day like today it's crisp and clear and there's a slight mist over the marshes. It's the atmosphere of the place, I think, and the sort of lifestyle that it allows me to lead. Cutting reeds is a way of actually improving the habitat. You can imagine a reed bed is rather like a very tall lawn. The more you cut it, the more you improve it if you do it at the right time in the winter. It encourages the reeds to grow thickly, which helps birds like the reed warbler, which actually nest amongst the reeds. We, of course, also cut the reeds because we use them for screening in hides and similar situations. I have the benefit of being able to do fairly practical country crafts, such as the reed screening, and I can at one time be taking guided tours around or dealing with committee meetings, and of course just enjoying the natural history. There's a whole range of duties that we have to do. To build a hide out into the middle of the lagoon, which is the project that we've been doing over the last year, greatly improves our scope. It allows school children in particular to get very close to birds that otherwise they would never see. It's rare that you can do the sort of work that I do without having to worry too much about the economics of the situation, without having to justify everything by making a profit. We do need to make money on the reserve, but the sort of work that we do, the rewards really are the wildlife.
car ferry is the only means of crossing from the sandbanked side of the harbour entrance to Studland Heath. Tides, wind and currents can be unpredictable, and Roy Churchill finds that operating the ferry is never dull.
I've lived here all my life, and I had 3 families before, and virtually I wouldn't give it away. You've got Branksea Island and Thursday Island, Round Island, Long Island. Their history and beauty just speaks for itself. Originally, Charlie was a one-legged gull that got friendly with me about 16 years ago, and one of his offsprings comes back about every 4th year, and they fight till death, and it's quite pitiful to watch it. I've sometimes tried to separate them in doing so. Comes there and they say, well, this is my pitch now. The winner takes all, you know. It's very difficult here in fog. When it's real dense fog, then we've got to be very, very careful with the big ships, that is. So it's mainly those, I think, that don't know the stretch of water. It's very, very tidal, and it can very well, you know, you can cause accidents within seconds. You've got to realise what is around. This locality around here takes them really beating, you know. It's absolutely gorgeous, it's perfect.
Thomas Hardy wrote often of the wild and desolate heathland he called Egdon Heath on the southern side of the harbour entrance. A heathy, furzy, briary wilderness, he called it. That ancient country whose surface never had been stirred to a finger's depth, save by the scratching of rabbits, since it was brushed by the feet of the earliest tribes. Civilization was its enemy. He agreed with Thoreau, who wrote, "We need the tonic of wilderness, to wade sometimes in marshes where the bittern and the meadow hen lurk, and hear the booming of the snipe, to smell the whispering sedge where only some wilder and more solitary fowl builds her nest." At the same time that we're earnest to explore and learn all things, we require that all things be mysterious and unexplorable, that land and sea be infinitely wild, unsurveyed and unfathomed by us, because, unfathomed, we can never have enough of nature.